In the heart of a -30-degree Montana blizzard, a silent warrior found his purpose. Elias Thorne thought he had left the war behind until his wolf dog Atlas pulled a dying girl from the frozen depths of the Bitterroot Range. She held a secret that could bring down an empire and a rusted tin box that was never meant to be found. Now, with a team of elite mercenaries closing in on their isolated cabin, Elias must decide how far will a man go to protect a child who isn't his. Stay tuned for a story of sacrifice, survival, and the unbreakable bond of a pack. Please support our journey by subscribing to the channel. Chapter 1. The Howl of Destiny. The wind did not just blow in the Bitterroot Range. It screamed. It was a jagged sound that tore through the pine needles and clawed at the heavy timber walls of the cabin. Outside, the world was a void of white, -30 degrees, a temperature that turns breath into ice and hope into a memory. Inside, the fireplace crackled with a low orange glow. Elias Thorne sat in his worn leather chair. His eyes were fixed on the embers, but he was not really seeing them. He was seeing the dust of distant lands. He was hearing the echo of a shot he wished he never took, and he was feeling the phantom weight of a small hand that had slipped from his grasp many years ago. A ghost lived in the scars on his shoulder. A ghost named Clara, his daughter. He had come to Montana to be alone with his ghosts, because the silence of the mountains was easier to bear than the noise of a world that kept moving on without her. Then, the silence broke. It was not the wind. It was a sound from deep within the throat of something ancient. Atlas stood by the heavy oak door. He was a massive creature, a king of the high country, a wolf-dog hybrid with a frame built of muscle and iron. His fur was the color of charcoal after a fire, streaked with silver and white like the mountain peaks in winter. Around his neck, a thick mane of dark hair stood on end. Atlas let out a howl. It was haunting, primal. It was the sound of a warning from 1,000 years ago. Elias looked up. "Stop it, Atlas," he murmured. "It is just the storm." But Atlas did not stop. He turned toward Elias. His amber eyes were glowing like molten gold in the firelight. There was a frantic intelligence in those eyes. The great dog turned back to the door. He began to scratch at the wood with his heavy claws. His tail, thick and bushy, thrashed against the floor. At the very end of that tail, a single white tip flickered like a candle in the dark. Atlas whined, a high, urgent sound. Elias stood up. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft under the door. He knew that dog. Atlas did not scratch at doors for the sake of the wind. Something is out there, isn't it? Elias reached for his heavy parka. He pulled on his boots. He checked the holster at his side. Habit died hard for a man like him. The moment Elias unlatched the door, the mountain tried to force its way inside. The blizzard roared in, bringing a wall of ice. Atlas did not hesitate. He plunged into the whiteout. Elias struggled to follow. The snow was waist-deep in places. He could barely see his own hand in front of his face. "Atlas, stay close," Elias shouted, but the dog was a ghost in the storm. He moved with a grace that Elias could only envy. Elias followed the sound of the dog's paws crunching through the crust of the ice. He followed that white tip on Atlas's tail. It was the only beacon in a world of gray. They pushed past the tree line, toward the jagged rock formations that overlooked the valley. Atlas stopped. He was standing over a narrow crevice in the rocks. He began to dig, furiously. Elias reached him. He fell to his knees. The wind was trying to tear the goggles from his face. "What is it, boy?" Then he saw it, a flash of red wool, underneath a shelf of ice. tucked away like a discarded doll, was a child. Elias felt his heart stop. The world went silent. He reached out, his gloved fingers trembling. He pulled the child from the crevice. She was small, maybe 7 or 8. Her skin was the color of blue porcelain. Her eyes were closed. She was clutching a rusted tin box to her chest. Wrapped around her small hands was a knitted scarf. It was unfinished. A needle was still stuck through the yarn. She was not moving. Elias pulled her into his lap. He felt for a pulse. Nothing. Then, a tiny, fragile flutter against his thumb. "She is still here," Elias whispered to the storm. He began to rub her arms, trying to force life back into her frozen veins. "Atlas, help me." The dog understood. Atlas moved in. He laid his massive, warm body over the girl. He tucked his head near her chest. He was a furnace of fur and bone. His heavy mane acted as a shield against the biting wind. His charcoal fur absorbed the little heat Elias could generate. Slowly, the girl's chest moved. A shallow breath, then another. "God is good," Elias breathed. He wrapped his parka around her and the dog. "We have to go. Now." The journey back was a blur of pain and ice. Elias carried her, tucked against his chest. Atlas paved the way, acting as a windbreak for the man and the child. When they reached the cabin, Elias kicked the door shut. He laid her on the rug before the fire. He worked with the precision of a field medic. He removed her wet boots. He wrapped her in heated blankets. He kept Atlas close to her feet. The girl opened her eyes. They were a deep, startling green, but they were empty. There was no crying. There was no screaming for her mother. There was only a hollow silence. She stared at the ceiling, her tiny hands still locked around that rusted tin box. Elias leaned over her. "It is okay. You are safe. My name is Elias." The girl did not blink. She looked through him, not at him. The shock was total. It was the look Elias had seen in the eyes of soldiers who had seen the world break. She was mute, trapped in a prison of her own mind. Elias reached for the tin box. "No, do not take it." The girl's grip tightened. Her knuckles were white. A small, broken sound came from her throat. Elias backed away. "I will not touch it. I promise." The girl's gaze drifted down. She saw Atlas. The massive dog was watching her with his amber eyes. He lowered his head. He gave a soft, low huff. The girl reached out a trembling hand. She did not touch his head. She reached for the very end of his tail. She wrapped her small fingers around the white tip. She squeezed it gently. Atlas did not move. He let out a deep, contented sigh. For the first time. The girl's breathing slowed. The tension left her shoulders. She had found a point of light in the darkness. Elias sat on the floor. He watched the firelight dance across her pale face. He looked at the unfinished scarf. He looked at the fear in her eyes. He thought of Clara. He thought of the day the world took his light away. He thought of the years he spent wishing he could have been there. To hold her. To keep her warm. To tell her that the monsters were gone. He looked at the nameless girl clutching his dog's tail. Elias felt a resolve harden inside him. It was a feeling he thought had died in the desert. He looked at the storm raging outside the window. He knew the people who left a child in a blizzard were coming. He knew the mountain would not be silent for long. Elias leaned back against the hearth. He spoke to his own soul. Not this time. He looked at her green eyes one more time. "I will not lose her." Chapter 2. The Language of Silence. The interior of the cabin felt different now. Before, it was a fortress of solitude. a place where Elias Thorne could hide from a world that had taken too much. Now, it was a sanctuary for a broken bird. The heat from the hearth hummed in the air, thick with the scent of pine resin and old cedar. Elias sat across from the girl, Maya. She was wrapped in a heavy wool blanket, her small frame almost swallowed by the fabric. She was still not speaking. The silence she carried was not empty. It was heavy, dense, like the air before a thunderstrike. She sat on the rug. Her fingers were still locked onto the edge of the blanket. Atlas was there. The great wolf dog had claimed his position at her feet. He was a mountain of charcoal fur. His amber eyes never left her face. Atlas did not bark. He did not whine. He simply existed. He lowered his massive head and rested it gently on Maya's lap. His weight was a grounding force. Elias watched as the girl's breathing began to match the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of the dog's chest. Atlas was listening. Not to the wind, not to the cabin's creaks. He was listening to the frantic drum of her heart. He was translating the language of her fear into the language of peace. Maya's hand moved, slowly, like she was afraid her own skin might shatter. She reached for the charcoal pencil Elias had placed on the low table. She pulled a stack of yellowed sketching paper toward her. The scratching sound began. It was sharp, urgent. Elias watched her small hand fly across the page. She was not drawing the things a child usually draws. There were no suns, no smiling houses. She drew a woman. The lines were thin, elegant. But the woman's face was twisted in a mask of terror and love. The woman was kneeling in the snow, in the next sketch. The woman was pushing a smaller figure Maya into a dark, hollow burrow beneath a fallen tree. The woman's hand was outstretched. She was pointing. She was pointing toward the jagged, cruel peaks of the Bitterroot Range. Maya stopped. She looked at the drawing. A single tear tracked through the soot on her cheek. She did not sob. The grief was too deep for tears to carry. Elias felt a lump form in his throat. He reached for the rusted tin box that sat on the table. Maya did not stop him this time. She was watching Atlas, her fingers idly stroking the dog's majestic mane. Elias unlatched the lid. Inside, tucked beneath the unfinished knitted scarf, was a piece of technology that looked out of place in this primitive wilderness, a military-grade hard drive. It was heavy, encased in reinforced steel. Beside it lay a folded scrap of paper. The edges were damp. The ink was smeared. Elias unfolded it. The handwriting was hurried, desperate. "Find the man with the gray wolf," the note read. "He is our only hope." Elias stared at the words. He felt the weight of the mountain pressing down on the roof. He was the man. The legends of the amber-eyed guardian had reached the valleys below. Locals talked about the hermit on the ridge, the man who lived with a beast that looked like a ghost of the forest. Maya's mother had heard the stories. She had gambled her life on a ghost story. She had sent her daughter into a blizzard, trusting that a stranger and a wolf dog would be more merciful than the people chasing them. Maya began to draw again. The pencil moved with a violent energy now. She drew a logo, a circle. Inside it was a cold, piercing eye. Falcon Eye. Elias knew that name. They were a private security firm, a shadow corporation that worked in the dark corners of the government. They were not just security. They were a billion-dollar machine of corruption. Maya turned the page. She drew a tree. It was a pine tree, huge, but its top had been shattered by lightning. It stood next to a flat, gray Vachja. Elias recognized it instantly. The lightning struck pine. It was 3 miles north, in a valley that stayed in the shadows all day, next to the tree. Maya drew a door hidden in the rock, a secret data relay station. That was where her mother had worked. That was what they were protecting, or what they were trying to expose. Elias looked at the hard drive. Then he looked at the child. She was so small. She was carrying the weight of a national scandal in a rusted tin box. The data on that drive probably contained names, bank accounts, contracts for illegal surveillance, the kind of secrets that make powerful men turn into monsters. Atlas shifted his weight. He let out a low, comforting huff. The girl leaned her head against the dog's charcoal fur. She closed her eyes. She was exhausted. Her body was giving in to the warmth of the fire. Elias stood up. He walked to the window. The storm had not stopped. The snow was piling up against the glass. He saw his own reflection, a man who had come here to die in the silence. Now, the silence was gone. It had been replaced by a duty he could not ignore. Maya held the key to a network of corruption that could burn the state to the ground. And the people who worked for Falcon Eye were not going to stop at the tree line. They were coming. They would follow the scent of the hard drive. They would follow the trail of the mother's blood. They would come for the girl. Elias looked back at the hearth. Maya had fallen asleep. Her hand was still resting on Atlas's tail. Her fingers were curled around the white tip. Atlas looked at Elias. His golden eyes were solemn. He knew. The dog understood the shift in the air. The sanctuary was no longer a hiding place. It was a battlefield. Elias reached for his rifle leaning against the wall. He checked the bolt. The click of the metal sounded loud in the quiet room. He looked at the drawing of the lightning-struck pine. They had to know what was on that drive. But first, he had to keep her alive. The man with the gray wolf. Elias whispered the words to the shadows. Your mother chose the right man. He walked over to the girl and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. He looked at the charcoal streaks on her hands. The language of silence had told him everything he needed to know. The war had found him, and he would finish it. Chapter 3. Ghosts Under the Ridge. The floorboards groaned as Elias moved the heavy oak table. Beneath it lay a trap door. Hidden by years of dust and a thick wool rug, it led to a small cellar, a cold storage space built into the very bedrock of the mountain. Maya, Elias whispered. His voice was steady, like the earth itself. The girl looked up from her sketches. Her green eyes were wide, fearful. You must go down here, just for a little while. He helped her descend the wooden ladder. He gave her a small lantern and a heavy down sleeping bag. Do not come out until you hear Atlas bark 3 times. Do you understand? Maya nodded. She clutched the rusted tin box to her chest, as if it were her own beating heart. Elias closed the trap door. He slid the table back into place. He stood in the center of the room, checking his gear. His rifle was slung across his back, a cold piece of precision steel. Atlas stood by the door. The wolf dog was restless. His charcoal fur seemed to ripple with nervous energy. His amber eyes were fixed on the north wall. He knew where they were going. He could smell the wrongness in the air. Let us go, Elias said. They stepped out into the biting cold. The storm had softened into a ghostly fog. The world was a study in shades of gray. They moved like shadows through the pine trees. Elias led the way, using the trees for cover. Atlas moved beside him, a silent, predatory phantom. The wolf dog did not make a sound as his paws touched the frozen crust of the snow. They climbed the ridge toward the lightning-struck pine. The tree stood like a skeleton against the sky. Its top was blackened and jagged, a monument to a forgotten storm. Behind it, the rock wall looked solid, impenetrable. But Elias saw the lines. He saw the way the shadows fell unnaturally straight. Camouflage, expertly done, but not good enough to fool a man who had spent his life staring through a scope. Elias approached the rock. He found the seam. A hidden keypad was tucked behind a false stone. He used a small electronic device from his old kit. A few seconds of humming. Then a click. A section of the rock slid back, revealing a corridor of cold. Clinical white light. The air that rushed out smelled of ozone and recycled air. Elias signaled to Atlas. The dog lowered his head, his ears tucked back. They entered the belly of the mountain, inside. The facility was quiet. The hum of massive servers filled the hallway. Elias moved with the silence of a ghost. He reached the main terminal. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Folders began to open, black files. Falcon Eye was not just watching criminals. They were watching everyone. Governments, journalists, judges. It was a library of blackmail. Elias opened a folder labeled Surveillance Targets. He scrolled through the names. Then he stopped. His heart hammered against his ribs. Elias Thorne. There was a photo of him from years ago, and a red stamp across the file refused contract. High risk. He remembered that day. A group of men in suits had visited his old home. They had offered him a job. A dirty job that involved a target who didn't deserve to die. He had turned them down. He thought they had forgotten him, but Falcon Eye never forgot. They had been watching him in his isolation. They knew where he lived. They were simply waiting for a reason to come back. Suddenly, Atlas let out a low, vibrating growl. Elias looked up. A door at the end of the hall opened. Two men in black tactical gear stepped out. Intruders. One of them shouted. Elias reached for his weapon, but he was too slow. One of the men raised a rifle. Atlas did not wait for a command. He launched himself from the shadows. He was a blur of silver and gray. He did not bark. He did not growl. He struck the first man with the force of a falling tree. The man went down hard, his weapon clattering across the floor. The second man tried to aim, but Atlas was already there. The wolf dog used his massive frame to knock the man against the steel wall. Elias moved forward. He finished the job, striking the man with the butt of his rifle. The hallway went silent again. Elias grabbed a set of encryption keys from the desk. We have to go. Atlas. Now. They ran for the exit, but as they stepped back into the snow, a red light flickered on a small pole nearby. A thermal scanner. It had caught them. High above on the ridge, a drone hummed to life, its electronic eyes locked onto the massive shape of the wolf dog. Elias did not see the drone, but he felt the change in the air. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of oil and metal. They pushed through the snow, heading back to the cabin. Atlas was breathing hard, every few steps. He looked back at his own tracks. The deep, heavy paw prints were an open map in the white snow. Elias looked at the encryption keys in his hand. He looked at the ridge behind them. He knew they were being tracked. Their scent was in the system now. Their location was no longer a secret. When they reached the cabin, Elias felt the weight of the mountain pressing in. He knew the mercenaries would be close behind. But he also knew something else. They had seen him enter the facility. They knew he had the keys, and they knew he had the girl. They could easily destroy this cabin with a single missile, but they wouldn't. Not yet. They needed the hard drive in Maya's tin box. They needed it intact to protect their billion-dollar secrets. The drive was their only shield, a fragile advantage, but it was all Elias had. He walked into the cabin and locked the heavy door. He moved the table and opened the trap door. Maya looked up. Her face was pale in the lantern light. Elias reached down and took her hand. "It is time to prepare," he said. Atlas stood by the window. His eyes were fixed on the dark tree line. The ghosts were no longer under the ridge. They were at the door. Chapter 4. 6 Hours on the Edge. The radio crackled with static, a thin, rasping sound in the frozen quiet of the cabin. Elias adjusted the dial with steady fingers. His eyes remained fixed on the darkened valley below. Thorn to Miller. "Come in." There was a long pause. Then, a voice broke through the white noise. "Elias, is that you?" It was Captain Miller, an old friend from the Department of Homeland Security. "I have the girl," Elias said, "and I have the drive. Falcon Eye is on my doorstep. Listen to me carefully." Miller's voice was tense, low. "The storm is a monster. No air support can launch in this. The nearest tactical team is grounded 6 hours away." 6 hours. Elias looked at Maya. She was sitting by the hearth. Her small hands were wrapped tightly around the unfinished scarf. "One more thing." Miller continued. "Do not trust the local authorities. Falcon Eye owns the sheriff. They own the roads. You are on your own until the clock runs out. Stay alive." "Elias." The radio went dead. Elias turned to the room. He felt the weight of the next 6 hours pressing against his chest. 6 hours in the dark. Suddenly, the lights flickered once. Then, they died. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The small electric clock on the mantel went black. Total silence. Outside, the faint, metallic click of a long-distance speaker echoed off the mountain. "Thorn." The voice was cold, educated. It was Colonel Kane, the lead mercenary for Falcon Eye. "We know you have the child. We know you have the encryption. Give us the drive. And the girl goes to a safe house. Keep it. And this cabin becomes a grave. You have nowhere to run." Elias did not answer. He moved to the center of the floor. He began to work. He was no longer just a hermit. He was a hunter preparing his ground. He moved the heavy furniture. He rigged wires across the door frames, connected to small, sharp alarms. He scattered dry pine needles under the windows, a natural early warning system. Then, he looked at Atlas. The wolf dog was standing by the trap door. His ears were twitching. "Go down, Atlas," Elias whispered. Atlas did not hesitate. He descended into the crawl space beneath the floorboards. He was a shadow among shadows, a living radar system. He would move through the narrow passages, tracking the boots of the men outside. Elias walked over to Maya. He knelt in front of her. He could see the terror in her green eyes. Her small body was trembling. "Look at me," Elias said. "I need you to be brave. Just for a little longer. Can you do that for me?" Maya did not speak, but she reached out. She felt the vibrations of the floor. Below them, Atlas let out a low, guttural growl. It was a sound so deep it was felt rather than heard. The dog was signaling. They were here. Maya leaned her back against the wooden floor, feeling the warmth and the strength of the beast below her. She clutched the red scarf to her face. It still smelled like her mother. She took a deep breath, and she stopped trembling. The radio on the table hummed. Kane was calling again. "Thorn, don't be a fool. The girl is shivering. She is hungry. Why let her suffer for a piece of plastic?" Elias picked up the handset. "Listen to me, Kane. I have the drive over a bucket of corrosive acid. One step through that door, and your billion-dollar secrets turn into smoke. You want the drive. You wait until the sun comes up. If I see a single muzzle flash, the data is gone, and you go to prison for the rest of your life. There was a long silence on the other end. Elias could hear Cain's breathing. He was stalling, buying minutes, buying seconds. He needed every tick of the clock. The floorboards creaked. Atlas growled again. Sharper this time. The enemy was at the east window. Elias moved, silent as a ghost. He pulled Maya toward the heavy stone fireplace, the only part of the cabin that could stop a high-caliber bullet. You think you can hold us off? Thorn, Cain's voice came back. We don't need to enter. We just need to make you uncomfortable. A sudden, sharp crack shattered the air. A bullet tore through the cedar siding, then another. Splinters of wood flew through the room like shrapnel. Elias threw himself over Maya. He used his large frame to cover her completely. His heart was a hammer. He could hear the wind whistling through the new holes in his home. The smell of gunpowder and sawdust filled the air. Elias pressed his forehead against Maya's hair. I have you, he whispered. I have you, outside. The mercenaries were circling, inside. The clock began its slow, torturous crawl. 6 hours. The edge had never felt so thin. Chapter 5. A symphony of blood and snow. The blizzard finally broke. The wind, once a roaring beast, had settled into a hollow whistle in the sudden stillness. The mountain was terrifyingly quiet. Elias Thorne felt the change in the air. He felt the pressure drop. He knew. The silence was the signal for the end. Colonel Cain did not wait for the sun. Suddenly, the darkness outside exploded. Muzzle flashes strobed against the snow like lethal lightning. High-caliber rounds tore through the cedar logs. The cabin, Elias's sanctuary for 10 years, was being shredded. Glass shattered. Wood splintered into thousands of tiny daggers. Get down! Elias roared. He pulled Maya behind the heavy stone base of the fireplace. He covered her with his own body, feeling the thud of bullets hitting the other side of the rock. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and ancient dust. Then, a different sound. A heavy thud from the back of the house. A window had been breached. The mercenary moved like a shadow. Fast. Professional. He knew about the cellar. He dropped through the opening in the floorboards, aiming for the girl, but he had forgotten about the guardian in the dark. Atlas was waiting. The wolf dog did not growl. He did not warn. He launched himself from the pitch-black corner of the crawl space, a charcoal blur of fury. The mercenary panicked. He swung his rifle. A sharp crack echoed in the confined space. The bullet struck Atlas in the shoulder, but the beast did not falter. He took the hit and kept coming. Atlas slammed into the man's chest, his massive weight pinning the intruder to the stone wall. The mercenary's scream was cut short. Maya watched from the corner of the cellar, her eyes wide with horror. She saw the blood on the silver streaks of Atlas's fur. She saw the dog's amber eyes burning with a protective fire. Atlas had held the line. Elias heard the shot from below. He heard the struggle. Something inside him snapped. The hermit, the grieving father, the man who wanted to be left alone. He was gone. The sniper was back. Elias rose from the floor. He moved with a fluid, ghostly precision. He did not hide. He moved to the shattered window. He saw a flash of a helmet in the tree line. Elias fired. One shot. One target down. He shifted his weight. Another muzzle flash from the ridge. Elias did not blink. He breathed out. The second man fell into the snow before he could even pull his trigger. It was a legendary display of skill. Elias was a shadow moving through a broken house. He fired through the holes in the walls. He fired through the smoke. Every shot found its mark. He was no longer defending a cabin. He was protecting a daughter. He was avenging the blood of his dog. Cain's voice screamed over the radio. Fall back, fall back. But it was too late. The ground began to vibrate. It started as a low hum. Then it became a rhythmic thumping that shook the very foundation of the mountain. The sky above the Bitterroot Range was suddenly flooded with light. Massive searchlights cut through the mist. The roar of twin engines drowned out the sounds of battle. Miller's helicopters had arrived. Black Hawks descended like giant birds of prey. Special forces rappelled down on ropes, their gear gleaming under the spotlights. They hit the ground running. The forest was no longer Cain's playground. Within minutes, the screams of the mercenaries were replaced by the harsh commands of the military. Cain's team was neutralized. The long night was over. Elias did not watch the arrest. He dropped his rifle. He scrambled toward the cellar. Atlas. He pushed aside the broken furniture. He saw Maya first. She was kneeling in the dirt. She was holding Atlas's head in her lap. The wolf dog was lying on his side. His breathing was heavy, ragged. The charcoal fur on his shoulder was matted with dark blood. He was exhausted. Elias knelt beside them. His hands were shaking. Easy, boy, easy. Atlas opened his amber eyes. He looked at Elias, then he looked at Maya. Slowly, the large, bushy tail moved. The white tip wagged weakly against the floor. A signal. The pack was safe. Hope had survived the storm. Then, it happened. The sound that Elias thought he would never hear. Maya let out a gasp, a sharp, sobbing breath. Then, she began to cry. It was not a quiet cry. It was a wail, a scream of release. It was the sound of a heart finally breaking out of its cage. She threw her arms around Elias's neck. She buried her face in his shoulder. Her tears soaked into his parka. The silence that had lasted for so long was shattered. She sobbed for her mother. She sobbed for the fear. She sobbed for the dog who had taken a bullet for her. Elias held her tight. He looked at Atlas. He looked at the helicopters circling above. The war was over. And for the first time in 10 years, Elias Thorne felt the ice around his own heart begin to melt. Chapter 6. Dawn over the Bitterroot. The snow on the Bitterroot Range eventually melted. The ice that had gripped the mountains for so long turned into rushing streams, carrying away the debris of a winter that had changed everything. In the valleys below, the world had been shaken. The encryption keys found in the rusted tin box were a thunderbolt. Names were named. The Falcon Eye Corporation did not just fall, it shattered. The network of corruption that had stretched through the state was dismantled piece by piece. And in the middle of the whirlwind, there was a girl and a man. The legal battle was short. Elias Thorne had expected a fight, but the truth was a powerful ally. Captain Miller stood by his side. The records of Maya's mother were recovered. Her bravery was finally recognized. But Maya had no other kin. She had only the man who had pulled her from the ice, and the beast that had taken a bullet for her soul. When the judge signed the papers, Elias felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He was no longer a hermit hiding from the past. He was a father. They left Montana. The cabin was a place of ghosts, and they needed a place of light. They moved west, to the rolling green hills of Oregon. Elias bought a small ranch, a place with vast, open meadows. The air here did not bite. It tasted of salt from the distant ocean and the sweet scent of clover. Atlas loved the grass. The wolf dog had healed, though he moved with a slight, noble stiffness in his front shoulder. A silver scar remained beneath his charcoal fur, a permanent medal of honor. His amber eyes were still sharp, still primal. But the tension in his frame was gone. He no longer stood guard against mercenaries in the dark. He stood guard over a child's laughter. One evening, the sun was setting over the Oregon horizon. The sky was a canvas of violet and gold. Elias sat on the porch, watching Maya run through the high grass. She was carrying a kite, its tail snapping in the breeze. Atlas was running beside her. His large, bushy tail with the white tip was waving like a flag. Maya stopped. She looked at the dog. Then she looked back at Elias. She walked over to the porch. For months, she had used signs, smiles, the occasional whisper. But as she sat down beside Elias, she turned to him. Her voice was soft, like the rustle of leaves. "My mother saw him," she said. Elias froze. He did not look away from the sunset before she pushed me into the snow. Maya continued. "She told me not to be afraid. She said she had a dream. She saw a man with a gray wolf, waiting on the ridge. She told me that God would lead the wolf to my scent." Elias felt a shiver run down his spine. He thought of that night, the way Atlas had scratched at the door, the way the dog had howled at a storm that should have kept any living thing inside. He had thought it was luck or instinct. Now, he realized it was something much larger. The storm wasn't a tragedy. Elias whispered. Maya nodded. She leaned her head against his arm. "It brought us home." Elias looked at his hands. For 10 years, they had been the hands of a soldier. Now, they were the hands of a gardener, a protector. The ice in his own heart was gone. The silence of his life had been filled with the music of a child's voice. 3 broken lives. A soldier who had lost his light. A girl who had lost her world. A wolf dog who belonged nowhere. They had been thrown into a blender of ice and fire, and they had come out as a family. Maya reached out. She took Elias's hand in her small palm. She pointed toward Atlas. The dog had stopped running. He was standing on a small hill. His charcoal fur was catching the last rays of the sun. His amber eyes were glowing. He looked like a king of the wild, but he was watching them with a deep, quiet love. "We are a pack now." "Right, Dad." Elias felt his eyes sting. He pulled her close. "Yes," he said, "a pack. Always." Elias smiled. The scars on his shoulder did not ache anymore. The ghosts of Montana were far away. For the first time in a decade, Elias Thorne was not just surviving. He was home, in the silence of the Great Divide. We learn that no one is ever truly lost as long as there is a hand to hold and a loyal heart to lead the way. Love is not just a feeling. It is a choice to stand together when the storm is at its worst. If this story touched your heart, please join our pack by subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Your support keeps these stories of courage alive. Do not leave the warmth of our hearth just yet. Click the video on your screen now to begin another journey with us. Together, we honor the bond that makes us whole.